Sometimes the difference between dying alone in the desert and living to tell the tale comes down to one desperate moment. Jebediah Vance had been lost in the Sonoran Desert for 3 days without a drop of water. A grizzled prospector with nothing left, he spotted something unusual, a massive bulge on an old saguaro cactus. Hoping for moisture, he cut into it with his knife, expecting soft pulp. Instead, his blade struck metal. What he pulled from inside that ancient cactus would not only save his life, but make him the richest man in the entire territory. But how did a fortune in Union Army gold coins end up growing inside a desert plant for more than 20 years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 weeks before Jebediah Vance found himself staring at death in the Sonoran Desert, he sat on a wooden crate outside his canvas tent on the dusty edge of Copper Springs, Arizona territory. The morning sun was already fierce, even at 7 o'clock, and the copper-colored hills that gave the town its name shimmered in waves of heat. At 58 years old, Jeb had the kind of face that told stories without words, deep lines etched by wind and sun, a salt and pepper beard that needed trimming, and eyes that still held a glimmer of stubborn hope despite 2 decades of disappointment. His camp, if you could call it that, consisted of a worn canvas tent, a cold fire pit ringed with stones, and his mule Dusty tied to a mesquite tree. The animal looked as tired as Jeb felt. Everything he owned in this world fit into 2 canvas bags and a wooden crate. Prospecting tools, a few changes of clothes, his Bowie knife, a dented coffee pot, and a leather-bound journal filled with maps and notes from failed claims stretching back to 1867. Jeb opened the journal now, running his weathered fingers over the pages. Each entry represented hope that had died hard. The Silver Bell claim in 69, the Rattlesnake Canyon venture in 73, the partnership with old Pete Garrison that fell apart in 78 when Pete took sick and died before they could prove out the claim. 20 years of chasing the dream that had brought him west after the war, and all he had to show for it was a tired mule and debts he could not pay. The town was waking up behind him. He could hear the rhythmic clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the creak of wagon wheels on the main street, the distant whistle of the morning stage coming in from Tucson. Copper Springs was not a large town, maybe 300 souls on a good day, but it had grown steadily since the big copper strike in 76. That strike had made men like Clayton Morehouse rich beyond measure, while men like Jeb continued to scratch at the earth and find nothing but disappointment. He closed the journal and stood, his knees protesting the movement. Time was when he could spend 14 hours working a claim without feeling it. Now every morning reminded him that he was not the young cavalry scout he had been during the war. Those days felt like a different life entirely. He had been good at that work, tracking Apache raiding parties through terrain that would kill most men, reading signs in the desert that others could not see, surviving on little water and less food when the mission required it. The army had valued those skills. They had kept him alive through some hard campaigns. After Appomattox, he had drifted west like so many others, looking for a new purpose. He found Sarah Brennan in Santa Fe in 66, a schoolteacher's daughter with auburn hair and a laugh that made him believe in second chances. They married that summer and headed to the Arizona territory with dreams of striking it rich. She believed in him completely, even when the claims came up empty year after year. Even when they had to move from town to town, following rumors of new strikes that never panned out for them. She died of fever in 81, 4 years ago now, but the loss still felt fresh some mornings. In her last days, lying in a borrowed bed in a borrowed room because they could not afford better, she had taken his hand and smiled at him. "You'll find it, Jeb," she had whispered. "I know you will. You'll strike it rich someday, just like you promised." He had made that promise on their wedding day, young and foolish, and certain the world would bend to his will if he just worked hard enough. He had not kept that promise. And now she was buried in the Copper Springs Cemetery under a simple wooden cross he had carved himself, and he was still here, still searching, still failing. "Morning, Jeb," the voice broke through his thoughts. He turned to see Martha Hendricks approaching, carrying a basket covered with a checkered cloth. She was a widow herself, maybe 45, with kind eyes and silver threading through her dark hair. She ran the general store on Main Street and had always treated him with more kindness than he probably deserved. "Morning, Martha," he said, managing a smile. "You are up early. Could say the same about you, though I suspect you have been up for a while." She held out the basket. "I baked too much cornbread last night. Thought you might could use some." He knew it was charity, knew she had not baked too much of anything, but pride and hunger were always at war in a man's heart, and hunger usually won. "That is mighty kind of you. I will pay you back when—" "Hush now," she said gently. "Just take it. And Jeb, Tom Dalton was asking about you yesterday. Said you still owe 3 months on your camp permit and the feed bill for Dusty." His jaw tightened. Tom Dalton was the sheriff, and more importantly, an old friend from the war. They had served together in the same cavalry unit, survived the same brutal campaigns. That made the debt sting worse. A man did not like owing money to friends. "I know," Jeb said quietly. "I will settle with him soon. I have got a new lead, Martha. A good one this time." She studied his face for a long moment, and he saw the gentle skepticism there. She had heard this before. Everyone in Copper Springs had heard it before. "You be careful out there," she finally said. "It is getting into the hot season. I have been in the desert before." "I know you have, but you are not 25 anymore, Jeb. None of us are." She touched his arm briefly, a gesture of concern, then turned and walked back toward town. He watched her go, then opened the basket. The cornbread was still warm, and the smell made his stomach clench with hunger. He had not eaten since yesterday morning. He broke off a piece and ate it slowly, savoring each bite, knowing he needed to make it last. As he ate, he saw another figure approaching from town. This one he recognized immediately and liked considerably less. Clayton Morehouse rode a fine black gelding and wore clothes that cost more than most families in Copper Springs made in half a year. He was 40, prosperous, and mean in the way some wealthy men are mean casual about it, as if other people's struggles were entertaining diversions. "Well, well," Morehouse said, reining his horse in front of Jeb's camp. "Still squatting on the edge of town, Vance. I thought surely you would have moved on by now. There is nothing here for the likes of you." Jeb finished chewing his cornbread and swallowed before responding. "Morning, Clayton. I did not realize my camp was bothering anyone." "It bothers me. Makes the town look poor, having an old failure camping in sight of decent folks." Morehouse smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Why do you not do everyone a favor and admit defeat? Go back east, get a job sweeping floors somewhere. That is about all you are fit for these days." There was a time when words like that would have provoked Jeb to violence. He had been a hard man in his youth, quick with his fists and not inclined to suffer insults. But age and failure had taught him something about choosing battles. Clayton Morehouse was rich and connected. Jeb was neither. Fighting him would only make things worse. "I appreciate your concern," Jeb said evenly, "but I will be moving on soon enough. Got a claim to check." Morehouse laughed, a sharp bark of derision. "Another claim? How many is that now, Vance? 50? 100? Face facts, you are no prospector. You are just a broken-down old soldier playing at being something you are not." He wheeled his horse around. 3 days. That is all the grace you are getting. If you are still camped here in 3 days, I will have Tom Dalton run you off, old friendship or not. I own half this town, and I do not want trash cluttering up the view." He rode off at a canter, leaving a small cloud of dust in his wake. Jeb stood there for a moment, the half-eaten cornbread suddenly tasting like ash in his mouth. 3 days. He had to leave anyway. His supplies were nearly gone, and if he did not find something soon, he would have to sell Dusty just to eat. But having Morehouse set a deadline on his failure made it worse somehow. He went into his tent and pulled out the old map he had been studying for the past week. It was a copy of a territorial survey from 1865, yellowed and fragile, that showed a series of canyons and dry washes in the Sonoran Desert, about 30 miles southwest of Copper Springs. There was a notation in faded ink near one of the canyons: 7th regged. Skirmish, lost supply, train. Jeb had heard the story years ago. During the war, a detachment of Union cavalry had been transporting payroll to Fort Yuma when they were ambushed by Confederate raiders. The raiders were themselves attacked by Apache, and in the chaos, the payroll wagon vanished. Some said it had been taken by the Apache. Others claimed the Confederates had hidden it. Most people figured it was just a tall tale, the kind of legend that grew in the telling until nobody knew what was true anymore. But Jeb had been a scout. He knew how to read terrain, how to think about lines of retreat and places to hide valuable cargo in a hurry. And he had found something in the old territorial survey that nobody else seemed to have noticed: a series of caves and overhangs in one particular canyon that would have been perfect for stashing a strongbox if you were running from enemies and planning to come back later. Maybe those soldiers never made it back. Maybe they died in the fighting, and the secret died with them. It was a long shot. Jeb knew that. But it was all he had left. One more try before he had to admit that Clayton Morehouse was right, that he was just a broken-down old soldier playing at something he was not. He rolled up the map and packed his few belongings with practiced efficiency. He would need to move carefully, conserve his water, travel in the early morning and late evening when the heat was less brutal. He knew the desert could kill a man in a dozen different ways, but he also knew how to survive out there. It was the one skill he had never lost. As he worked, he heard a small voice behind him. "Mr. Vance." He turned to see Billy Santos, a 12-year-old boy with dark hair and darker eyes that had seen too much for his age. Billy's father had died in a mining accident 2 years back, and his mother had succumbed to consumption last winter. The boy lived with his uncle now, a hard man who drank too much and cared too little. "Morning, Billy," Jeb said. "You are up early." "I wanted to catch you before you left. Martha said you were heading out to the desert." The boy held out a small cloth bundle. "I brought you some jerky. It is not much, but, Billy, you do not need to." "Please," the boy said quietly. "You helped me when my ma was sick. You sat with her so I could sleep. You never asked for anything back." Jeb's throat tightened. He had done that, true enough. Sitting with a dying woman in a hot room, reading to her from the Bible she loved, because a 12-year-old boy should not have to do that alone. It had not seemed like much at the time. He took the jerky. "Thank you, Billy. This means a lot. You will come back, will you not?" There was worry in the boy's eyes. "I will come back," Jeb said, and meant it. He had to come back. There were still people here who needed him. Even if he was just a broken-down old failure, I promise. He finished packing as the sun climbed higher, loaded his gear onto Dusty's back, and filled his 2 canteens from the town well. Sheriff Tom Dalton watched him from the jailhouse porch, but did not approach. That was probably for the best. Jeb did not want to have another conversation about money he did not have. By 9 o'clock he was riding south out of Copper Springs, following the dusty trail toward the Sonoran Desert. The town grew smaller behind him until it disappeared entirely in the heat shimmer. Ahead lay 30 miles of brutal country, rocky canyons, dry washes, and the kind of heat that could bake a man's brain inside his skull if he was not careful. But Jeb had been careful his whole life, and it had gotten him nowhere. Maybe it was time to take a risk. Maybe this one last try would be different. Maybe he would finally keep the promise he had made to Sarah all those years ago. The desert stretched out before him, vast and indifferent, keeping its secrets close. The first day went well enough. Jeb followed the old survey map southwest, through terrain he knew reasonably well, keeping to the shadows of rock formations when he could, rationing his water with the discipline of a man who understood what the desert demanded. Dusty plodded along steadily, unbothered by the heat, and by evening they had covered 15 miles. He made camp in a dry wash that would provide some protection from the wind and any wandering eyes, ate a cold supper of jerky and hardtack, and slept under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. The second day brought him deeper into country he did not know as intimately. The landmarks on the 20-year-old map did not quite match what he was seeing. Time and weather changed the desert in ways that were hard to predict. A dry wash could become a deep canyon after years of flash floods. Rock formations could collapse. What looked like a clear path on paper might be an impassable jumble of boulders in reality. By midday, he was fairly certain he had drifted off course. He stopped in the shade of an overhanging cliff and studied the map again, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what the surveyor had drawn 2 decades earlier. The sun was directly overhead now, and the temperature had climbed past 100 degrees. He took a careful sip from his canteen, just enough to wet his mouth, and considered his options. He could turn back. That would be the sensible thing to do. Admit he was lost, retrace his steps, and return to Copper Springs with nothing to show for the effort but confirmation that Clayton Morehouse was right about him. Or he could push forward, trust his instincts as a scout, and try to find the canyon marked on the map. Pride made the decision for him. He had come too far to turn back now. He studied the terrain ahead, looking for the kind of geological features that would mark the entrance to a canyon system. There, to the west, he could see a gap between 2 mesas that might be what he was looking for. It was hard to tell from this distance, but it felt right. He urged Dusty forward, following game trails when he could find them, picking his way through fields of broken rock when he could not. The afternoon stretched on, hot and silent except for the creak of leather and the sound of Dusty's hooves on stone. His shirt was soaked through with sweat, despite the shade of his broad-brimmed hat. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, he reached the gap between the mesas and felt a surge of hope. This was it, he recognized, the distinctive rock formations now, the way the canyon mouth opened up like a great jagged wound in the earth. This was where the skirmish had happened, where desperate men had hidden something valuable and never returned to claim it. He was about to enter the canyon when Dusty suddenly balked, pulling back on the reins with surprising force. Jeb frowned and dismounted, trying to soothe the animal. "Easy now, easy. What has got you spooked?" Then he heard a dry, rattling sound that made his blood run cold. He froze, scanning the ground, and saw it coiled in the shadow of a rock not 3 feet from where he stood. A Mojave rattlesnake, thick as his wrist and easily 4 feet long, its triangular head raised and ready to strike. Jeb backed away, slowly, carefully, keeping his movements smooth and deliberate. The snake watched him with black, unblinking eyes, its rattle maintaining that steady, terrifying rhythm. It took him a full minute to put enough distance between himself and the serpent to breathe normally again. "Good boy," he murmured to Dusty, patting the mule's neck. "Good boy, you saved us both." But in backing away from the snake, he had failed to watch where Dusty was stepping. The mule's hoof came down on a loose stone at the edge of the trail, and the animal stumbled badly. Jeb grabbed for the reins, trying to steady him, but it was too late. Dusty went down hard on his right front leg, and Jeb heard a sound no man ever wants to hear from his animal, a cry of real pain. The mule struggled back to his feet, but when he tried to put weight on that leg, he could not do it. Jeb's heart sank as he examined the injury, not broken, thank God, but badly sprained. Dusty would not be carrying anything for several days, at minimum. Jeb stood there in the fading light, doing calculations in his head that all came out wrong. His water was back in the canvas bags, strapped to Dusty's saddle. He had 2 canteens, maybe 3 days' worth if he was extremely careful. But without the mule, he could not carry all his supplies. He would have to leave most of it behind and proceed on foot, which meant he could not go as far or search as thoroughly as he had planned. More troubling was the return journey. It had taken him 2 days to get here. On foot, injured mule in tow, it might take 4 or 5 days to get back to Copper Springs. His water would not last that long. Not in this heat. He should turn back immediately. Every ounce of sense he possessed told him that, but he was so close now. The canyon was right there in front of him. If the strongbox was here, if the legend was true, he might be able to hire help from the nearest settlement, get Dusty proper care, return to Copper Springs in triumph instead of defeat. He made camp there at the canyon mouth as darkness fell, tending to Dusty's leg as best he could, with strips of cloth torn from his spare shirt. The mule would survive, but he would need rest and careful treatment. Jeb ate a small portion of his dwindling supplies and allowed himself 2 long swallows of water, more than he should have, but less than he wanted. That night, lying under his blanket with his saddle for a pillow, he thought about Sarah, about the promise he had made, about Billy Santos and Martha Hendricks, and even Sheriff Tom Dalton, people who still believed there was something worthwhile in him, despite all evidence to the contrary. About Clayton Morehouse's smug face and his 3-day ultimatum. He had to try. 1 more day of searching, then he would head back whether he found anything or not. 1 more day to keep the promise he had made 20 years ago. The 3rd day began badly and grew worse. He left Dusty hobbled near a patch of scrub grass with enough water to last the day, took 1 canteen for himself, and headed into the canyon on foot. The map showed several likely spots where a strongbox might be hidden: caves, overhangs, places where the rock formations created natural caches. He searched through the morning, the sun climbing higher and the temperature rising with it. Each promising spot turned out to be empty or already ransacked by earlier treasure seekers. By noon, he was down to the last location marked on the map, a series of caves near the eastern wall of the canyon. That was when he realized he had made a critical mistake. In his eagerness to explore, he had not paid close enough attention to landmarks. The canyon was a maze of side passages and dead ends, and he was no longer entirely certain which direction would take him back to where he had left Dusty. He stopped in the shade of a rock wall and took a drink from his canteen, allowing himself 3 swallows this time. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it helped clear his head. He studied the canyon walls, looking for something familiar, and felt the first real stirrings of fear. He was lost, not hopelessly lost, not yet, but definitely turned around. And he was nearly out of water. He tried to retrace his steps, but everything looked the same: red rock and shadow, endless variations on the same theme. The sun hammered down with physical force, and his shirt was plastered to his back. His lips were starting to crack, despite the water he had drunk. By mid-afternoon, he knew he was in serious trouble. His canteen was down to perhaps 2 cups of water. He had not found his way back to Dusty. The heat was affecting his thinking, making it hard to focus, hard to remember which passages he had already tried. He kept walking because stopping meant dying. The desert did not care about broken promises or old dreams. It would take him the same way it had taken countless others, slowly, methodically, without mercy or malice. As the 3rd day faded into evening, Jebediah Vance stumbled out of a narrow passage and found himself in a section of the canyon he did not recognize at all. The walls here were different, studded with massive saguaro cacti that had somehow found purchase in the rocky soil. Some of them were enormous, 30 or 40 feet tall, their arms reaching toward the darkening sky like silent centenaries keeping watch over secrets. The desert refused to give up. That was when he saw it, 1 cactus standing slightly apart from the others, with something wrong about its shape. About halfway up its trunk, maybe 12 feet off the ground, there was a massive bulge, a deformity that nature alone could not explain. It looked almost like a tumor, swelling the cactus to twice its normal width in that one spot. Jeb stared at it, his heat-addled mind trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Then, with the last of his strength, he understood. Water. The cactus stored water, and that bulge might contain more than the rest of the plant. It might be enough to keep him alive. Jeb approached the deformed cactus like a man in a dream. His legs felt distant, disconnected from his body, and his vision swam at the edges. 3 days without proper water had left him operating on instinct and desperation. The cactus towered above him, its bulk casting a shadow that provided blessed relief from the setting sun. The bulge was about 12 feet up, too high to reach from the ground. Under normal circumstances, climbing a saguaro would be foolish. The spines were as sharp as needles and densely packed, but these were not normal circumstances. Jeb was dying, and dying men do not worry overmuch about pain. He studied the cactus, looking for the best approach. The arms that branched off the main trunk might provide handholds, if he was careful. He pulled his knife from his belt, the Bowie knife that had been with him since the war, its blade worn but still sharp, and used it to test the cactus flesh. It was tough, fibrous, nothing like the soft pulp he had imagined. He found a relatively smooth section of trunk and began to climb. Each movement was agony. The spines found every exposed bit of skin, piercing through his shirt, his pants, the leather of his gloves. He gritted his teeth and kept climbing, driven by the single-minded need for water that made all other pain irrelevant. His boot found purchase on a knot in the trunk. His hand gripped one of the arms. Slowly, painfully, he worked his way up toward the bulge. By the time he reached it, his hands were bleeding, and his breathing came in ragged gasps. But he was there, clinging to the cactus 12 feet above the ground, face to face with the mysterious deformity. Up close, he could see that the bulge was even stranger than it had appeared from below. The cactus had grown around something, enveloping it completely. He could see the outline of whatever was inside, pressing against the plant's skin like bones beneath flesh. Jeb wedged himself as securely as he could manage and raised his knife. He had to be careful now. If he fell from this height in his weakened condition, he might not be able to get up again. He pressed the blade against the cactus skin and began to cut. The flesh resisted stubbornly. He had to saw back and forth, working the blade deeper, and with each stroke he kept expecting to hit the soft, water-rich pulp he desperately needed. Instead, maybe 6 inches in, his knife struck something with a metallic clang that rang out across the canyon. Jeb froze. Metal. There was metal inside this cactus. His heat-fogged mind struggled to make sense of it. This was not natural. This could not be natural. He widened the cut, working with frantic energy now, heedless of the spines that tore at his arms. The opening grew larger, and he could see it now, something dark and rectangular buried in the heart of the cactus. He reached into the opening, ignoring the pain, and his fingers closed around something hard and cold. It took him 10 minutes of careful work to free it. The cactus had grown completely around the object, and he had to cut away layer after layer of fibrous tissue to work it loose. Finally, with a last, desperate yank, it came free. The weight of it nearly pulled him off his precarious perch, but he managed to maintain his grip on both the cactus and his prize. Slowly, carefully, he climbed back down. His arms shook with effort, and his vision kept trying to tunnel down to a pinpoint, but he made it to solid ground without falling. He collapsed there in the shadow of the cactus, his prize clutched to his chest, gasping for breath. After a moment, he looked at what he had pulled from the cactus. It was a strong box, maybe 18 inches long, 12 inches wide, and 8 inches deep. The metal was heavily rusted and pitted with age, but he could still make out traces of stenciled letters on the lid. U.S. Army 7th Cavalry Regiment. His heart hammered against his ribs. It could not be. It simply could not be. But here it was, solid and real in his bleeding hands. The box was locked, but the lock was as rusted as the rest of it. He set the box on the ground, raised a rock above his head, and brought it down with all his remaining strength. The lock shattered on the third blow. Jeb's hands trembled as he opened the lid. Inside, nestled in rotted cloth, were rows of gold coins. They gleamed in the fading light, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Double eagles, $20 gold pieces, each one stamped with the date 1864. The lost payroll of the 7th Regiment. The legend had been true all along. For a moment, he just stared. His mind could not quite process what he was seeing. He had spent 20 years searching for something like this, and here it was, pulled from the heart of a cactus in a forgotten canyon. He reached out with trembling fingers and picked up one of the coins. It was real, heavy and cold, and absolutely real. He started to laugh, a hoarse, cracked sound that held equal parts joy and hysteria. He was rich. After everything, after all the failures and disappointments and broken promises, he had actually done it. He had found the mother lode. Then his laughter died as reality reasserted itself. He was rich, yes, but he was also still dying of thirst in the middle of the Sonoran Desert. He looked back at the cactus, at the gaping wound he had cut into its trunk. He needed water, and he needed it now. He struggled back to his feet, swaying with exhaustion, and approached the opening again. He reached inside, feeling around the cavity where the strongbox had been. His hand came back wet, not with the thick, mucilaginous sap he had expected, but with water, clear, cool water. He stared at his dripping fingers in disbelief, then thrust his hand back into the opening and cupped what moisture he could find. He brought it to his mouth and drank, and it was the sweetest thing he had ever tasted. He understood then, with the strange clarity that sometimes comes in desperate moments. The metal strongbox had been inside the cactus for 20 years or more. Metal conducted cold. In the desert, when temperatures dropped at night, the metal would cool faster than the surrounding plant tissue. Moisture would condense on its surface, collecting in the hollow space around it. The cactus had created its own little reservoir, trapped around that cold metal heart. The soldiers who had hidden the strongbox here had not realized what they were doing. They had jammed it into a young saguaro, planning to retrieve it later. But they never came back, and the cactus grew around their treasure, slowly enveloping it, and in doing so created a water cache that would, 20 years later, save Jebediah Vance's life. He drank as much as he could from the opening, then used his knife to cut away more of the cactus, accessing more of the precious moisture. It was not much, maybe the equivalent of 2 or 3 cups, but it was enough. Enough to clear his head, enough to give him the strength he needed. He sat back down beside the strongbox as full darkness settled over the canyon. The stars came out one by one, brilliant against the black sky. He had found water. He had found a fortune in gold. And if he could just survive the journey back, he would finally keep the promise he had made to Sarah all those years ago. But first, he had to figure out how to get out of this canyon alive. Jeb spent that night beside the cactus, too exhausted to move any farther. He wrapped himself in his blanket against the desert cold and kept the strongbox close, one hand resting on it even in sleep. His dreams were fevered, confused, Sarah's face mixed with images of gold coins spilling through his fingers like water, Clayton Morehouse's mocking laughter echoing through endless canyons. He woke before dawn, stiff and sore, every muscle protesting. His hands were swollen from the cactus spines, and he spent the first hour of daylight carefully pulling out the ones he could reach with his knife tip. It was slow, painful work, but it had to be done. Infection in the desert could kill a man as surely as thirst. As the sky lightened to grey and then pale blue, he took stock of his situation with clearer eyes than he had possessed the night before. The water from the cactus had saved his life, but he had perhaps a cup remaining in his canteen. The strongbox was heavy. He estimated it at close to 70 pounds with all those gold coins. Under normal circumstances, that would not be impossible to carry. But he was weakened by 3 days of heat and thirst, and he still had to find his way back to Dusty and then make the long journey to Copper Springs. He opened the strongbox again in the growing light and counted the coins. 347 double eagles. At $20 each, that came to just under $7,000. A fortune. More money than most men in the Arizona Territory would see in a lifetime. But money was no good to a dead man. He had to be practical about this. He could not carry all the coins and survive. That much was clear. He needed to cache most of them here, take enough to prove his find, and return later with proper equipment and help. The thought of leaving any of the treasure behind made his stomach clench, but there was no other choice. He counted out 30 coins, $600 worth, and wrapped them carefully in his spare shirt. That much he could carry in his saddlebag without too much difficulty. The rest he placed back in the strongbox, closed the lid, and considered where to hide it. The cactus itself seemed like the obvious choice. He wrapped the box in what remained of his blanket, climbed the cactus again, every spine, a fresh agony, and wedged the package back into the opening he had cut. Then he used his knife to cut sections of the cactus flesh he had removed and fitted them back over the opening like a crude bandage. From a distance, it would look like nothing more than a deformed cactus, which was exactly what he wanted. With that done, he turned his attention to finding his way back, in the clear light of morning. With water in his system and hope in his heart, the task seemed less daunting. He studied the canyon walls, looking for landmarks, and gradually began to recognize the way he had come. That rock formation there, shaped like a broken tooth. That stand of Ocotillo, the way the morning sun hit a particular cliff face. It took him most of the morning, but he found his way back to where he had left Dusty. The mule was still there, grazing on the scrub grass, favoring his injured leg but looking otherwise sound. Jeb's eyes actually stung with relief at the sight of the animal. He had not realized how much he feared he would not find his way back, that he would die alone in this maze of stone with his fortune hidden and no one the wiser. "Good boy," he murmured, stroking Dusty's neck. "Good, brave boy. We are going home." He examined the mule's leg carefully. The swelling had gone down some, and while Dusty still could not carry weight on it comfortably, the prognosis was better than Jeb had dared hope. With careful management, they might make it back to Copper Springs in 4 or 5 days, instead of the week he had feared. He redistributed his remaining supplies, keeping only what was essential and abandoning the rest. His prospecting tools, his tent, even his coffee pot, all left behind to lighten the load. He kept his canteen, the wrapped coins, some jerky, and his knife. Everything else was just weight that might slow them down. The return journey began in the cool of late afternoon. Jeb walked, leading Dusty by the reins, setting a slow but steady pace that would not overtax either of them. He had mapped the route in his mind, and he was confident now that he could find his way back to Copper Springs. The question was whether he could do it before his water ran out. He rationed carefully, allowing himself 3 small sips at dawn, midday, and dusk. It was barely enough to keep his mouth from feeling like sun-baked leather, but it would have to do. He could go perhaps 3 days on this regimen if he was lucky. After that, things would get difficult again. The first day of return travel passed without incident. He covered maybe 8 miles, less than he would have liked but respectable given the circumstances. He made camp that night in the lee of a rock formation, ate a small piece of jerky, and allowed himself 1 extra sip of water to celebrate still being alive. As he lay there watching the stars wheel overhead, he let himself think about what came next. He would return to Copper Springs. He would show the coins to Sheriff Tom Dalton, prove the find was real. He would pay off his debts to Tom, to Martha, to everyone he owed. He would buy proper equipment and hire men he could trust. Then he would come back for the rest of the treasure. And after that, what? He could buy land, start a ranch, live out his years in comfort. He could help Billy Santos, make sure the boy had opportunities that Jeb himself never had. He could do something good with this fortune, something that would make Sarah proud if she was watching from wherever the dead watched from. But first, he had to survive. Everything depended on that. The second day of return travel brought new challenges. The temperature climbed above 110 degrees by noon, and even Jeb's experienced desert discipline was tested. He forced himself to keep moving through the worst heat, knowing that stopping to rest in the sun would only prolong the agony. Dusty struggled with the heat and his injured leg, and twice Jeb had to stop and soak strips of cloth in his precious water to cool the mule's head. By evening, his canteen was down to perhaps 4 good swallows. 2 more days to Copper Springs, maybe 3. The arithmetic did not work in his favor. He tried not to think about it as he made camp that night, tried not to think about dying within sight of salvation, his pockets full of gold and his belly empty of water. The desert did not care about irony. It would kill him the same whether he was rich or poor. But he had survived worse in the war. He had outlived men who were stronger and smarter and better prepared. There was something stubborn in him that simply refused to quit, even when quitting would have been the rational choice. Sarah used to tease him about it. "You are too ornery to die, Jeb Vance," she would say with that smile that made everything worthwhile. "The devil himself could not drag you down." He hoped she was right. He was about to find out. The third day of return travel began with the last of Jeb's water. He allowed himself 3 small swallows at dawn and stared at the empty canteen with a hollow feeling in his chest. Copper Springs was still at least 40 miles away, maybe more. On foot, in this heat, that might as well be 400. He could feel the gold coins in his saddlebag, their weight a constant reminder of how close he had come. How absurd it would be to die now, with a fortune in his possession and home within reach. But the desert specialized in absurdity. It took no notice of human plans or desires. It simply was, vast and indifferent, and men died in it every day. Dusty was struggling too. The mule's injured leg had worsened overnight, and he walked with a pronounced limp now that made Jeb's heart ache. The animal had served him faithfully for 6 years, asked nothing but food and water and decent treatment, and now Jeb was pushing him past his limits because of human greed and stubbornness. "I am sorry, boy," Jeb murmured as they walked. "I am truly sorry. Just a bit farther, then you can rest all you need." The sun climbed higher, hammering down with malicious intensity. Jeb's lips had cracked and started bleeding. His tongue felt thick in his mouth, like a piece of old leather. Every breath seemed to scrape his throat raw. He knew the signs of serious dehydration, confusion, dizziness, the strange sense that his body was operating independently of his mind. By noon, he was hallucinating. Sarah walked beside him, young and beautiful in her wedding dress, smiling that gentle smile that had made him believe in second chances. "You did it, Jeb," she said. "You kept your promise." "Too late," he said, or thought he said. His voice was barely a croak. "Too late for us." "Never too late for doing the right thing," she replied. But when he turned to look at her, she was gone, and he was alone again, except for Dusty's labored breathing. He forced himself to keep moving, 1 foot in front of the other. That was all he could manage now. 1 step, then another, then another. If he stopped, he would not start again. Some part of him understood that with crystal clarity. The afternoon stretched into a haze of heat and pain. Time lost meaning. He might have walked for hours or days. The landscape looked the same in all directions, red rock and shadow, the occasional twisted tree, the mountains in the distance that never seemed to get any closer. He did not hear the riders until they were almost on top of him. His sun-addled mind registered movement, the sound of hoofbeats, and he turned slowly, expecting another hallucination. But these were real. 3 men on horseback, watching him with expressions that ranged from curiosity to calculation. The one in the middle, clearly the leader, was a lean man in his 40s, with a weathered face and cold grey eyes. He wore a gun belt with practiced ease, and there was something in the way he sat his horse that spoke of violence never far from the surface. "Well now," the man said, "what have we got here? Looks like somebody got himself lost." Jeb tried to speak, but his ruined throat produced only a dry rasp. He swayed on his feet, using Dusty's reins to keep himself upright. The leader nudged his horse closer, studying Jeb with the kind of attention a man gives to a wounded animal he is deciding whether to shoot or pass by. "You alone out here?" Jeb managed a nod. "Long way from anywhere," one of the other riders said. He was younger, maybe 25, with a cruel mouth and restless eyes. "What you doing way out here, old man?" Jeb's hand moved instinctively toward his gun belt, but he moved slowly, weakly. The leader saw the movement and smiled. "Easy there, friend. We are not looking for trouble. just wondering what brings a man out to the deep desert with nothing but a lame mule. His eyes moved to Dusty's saddlebags. You got anything valuable in there? Water, maybe? We could trade. Jeb's mind cleared slightly, sharpened by danger. These were not good men. He knew their type from the war deserters, raiders, the kind who preyed on the weak and isolated. If they knew about the gold, they would kill him without hesitation. But if they thought he was just another failed prospector dying of thirst, they might leave him alone. Nothing, he managed to croak out. Prospecting. Bad luck. The leader studied him for a long moment, and Jeb could see him weighing the potential gain against the effort required. Finally the man shrugged. Prospectors, he said with contempt. All of you, the same. Chasing dreams till they kill you. He pulled a canteen from his saddle and tossed it down. It landed in the dust at Jeb's feet. Have a drink, old-timer. Dying of thirst out here is a hard way to go. Jeb stared at the canteen, hardly daring to believe it was real. The leader saw his hesitation and laughed. Go on, call it Christian charity. We got plenty more. The three riders watched as Jeb picked up the canteen with shaking hands and drank. The water was warm and tasted of metal, but it was the most beautiful thing he had experienced in days. He forced himself to drink slowly, not to gulp, even though every fiber of his being screamed to drain the canteen dry. Where you headed? The leader asked. Copper Springs, Jeb said, his voice slightly stronger now. That is 2 days north of here, easy. You will not make it on foot. The man considered for a moment. Tell you what, there is a trading post about 10 miles northwest. Place called Bitter Well. Not much, but they got water and supplies. You could rest up there, get your mule tended to. Why are you helping me? Jeb asked. The leader's smile did not reach his eyes. Like I said, Christian charity. Sides, you look like you got nothing worth taking, and killing a man just to watch him die is poor sport. He gathered his reins. You take care now, old-timer. Watch out for rattlesnakes. The three riders wheeled their horses and rode away to the south, leaving Jeb standing there with the canteen in his hands. He watched until they disappeared into the heat shimmer, then looked down at the canteen. Half full, maybe 2 days' worth of water if he was careful, and a destination Bitter Well. He had heard of the place, a hard-scrabble trading post that served prospectors and drifters. It was out of his way, but not impossibly so. If he could make it there, he could rest, get proper water, maybe even trade one of his gold coins for supplies and treatment for Dusty. He took another careful drink, capped the canteen, and started walking northwest. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. He had maybe 4 hours of daylight left, 10 miles. He could do 10 miles. He had done harder things in the war. The gold coins in his saddlebag felt heavier now, dangerous. Those riders had not searched him, but they might have friends. Word traveled in the desert, carried by men who lived outside the law. If anyone suspected he was carrying a fortune, his life would not be worth a plugged nickel. He would have to be careful at Bitter Well. Trust no one, get what he needed, and move on as quickly as possible. The treasure had already nearly killed him twice. He would not let it finish the job now. Bitter Well appeared on the horizon, just as the sun was setting, a cluster of low adobe buildings around a stone well that gave the place its name. Jeb had been walking for 6 hours, sustained by the water from the mysterious riders and the stubborn determination that had kept him alive through worse. Dusty limped beside him, exhausted but still moving. The trading post consisted of a main building that served as store, saloon, and boarding house, a stable, and 2 or 3 smaller structures whose purpose Jeb could not determine in the fading light. A few horses were tied at the hitching rail, and lamplight glowed yellow in the windows. The sight of human habitation, after days in the emptiness of the desert, made something in Jeb's chest loosen slightly. The main building's door stood open to catch whatever evening breeze might materialize. Jeb tied Dusty to the rail and stepped inside, blinking as his eyes adjusted to the dimmer interior. The place smelled of tobacco smoke, cooking meat, and unwashed bodies, the smell of frontier civilization in all its dubious glory. A woman stood behind the rough plank bar that served as both counter and drinking establishment. She was perhaps 50, with iron-grey hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything anymore. She looked Jeb up and down, taking in his condition with a single practiced glance. "You look like hell," she said bluntly. "Feel worse," Jeb replied, his voice still rough despite the water he had drunk. "You got a room and a meal?" "Got both. 25 cents for the room, 15 for supper. Breakfast is another dime, if you are still here come morning. And water for my mule, he needs tending. Sprained leg." The woman's expression softened slightly. "Old Carlos handles the stable. He is good with animals. Cost you 50 cents total for the night. Feed and doctoring included." She studied Jeb with those shrewd eyes. "You got 50 cents? Jeb hesitated. He could pull out one of the gold coins, but that would raise questions he did not want to answer. On the other hand, he still had a few silver coins in his pocket from before his expedition, the last of his legitimate money. He fished out the coins and laid them on the counter. 60 cents total." The woman scooped them up and nodded toward a hallway. "Room 3, supper will be ready in an hour. You want to wash up? There is a basin out back. I will send Carlos around for your mule." "Much obliged," Jeb said. He was turning toward the hallway when a voice spoke from a corner table. "Jebediah Vance. That is a name I have not heard in a while." Jeb turned slowly. Seated at the table, half hidden in shadow, was a man he recognized. Frank Holloway, another prospector, someone Jeb had crossed paths with a dozen times over the years. Frank was 10 years younger than Jeb, but looked older, worn down by disappointment and cheap whiskey. They had never been friends exactly, but they had shared camps and information the way prospectors sometimes did. "Frank," Jeb said cautiously, "did not expect to run into you here." "Could say the same." Frank gestured to an empty chair. "Sit. You look like you could use the rest." Jeb considered refusing, but his legs were shaking with exhaustion. He sat, keeping his saddlebag close. Frank poured whiskey from a bottle into a tin cup and pushed it across the table. "You look like you've been through it. Prospecting, or just plain lost?" "Bit of both," Jeb said. He took a sip of the whiskey and felt it burn its way down his ruined throat. "You? Same old thing. Following rumors, finding nothing." Frank's eyes were sharp, despite the alcohol on his breath. "Heard you been camping outside Copper Springs. Thought maybe you had given up the search." "Never give up," Jeb said quietly. "No, I suppose you do not." Frank leaned back in his chair. "That has always been your problem, Jeb. Too stubborn to know when you are beat. Though I hear Clayton Morehouse is trying to run you out of town. That true. Word traveled fast in the territory, even to nowhere places like Bitter Well." Jeb nodded. "He gave me 3 days to clear out. That was almost a week ago. Guess I am already gone as far as he is concerned." "Man like that," Frank said, "he does not forget. You go back, he will make trouble for you. Let him try." Frank studied Jeb for a long moment, and there was something calculating in his gaze that made Jeb uneasy. "You found something out there, did you not?" Jeb's hand moved fractionally closer to his saddlebag. "What makes you say that?" "The way you are sitting, the way you are keeping that bag close." "I know that look, Jeb. That is the look of a man who is carrying something worth protecting." Frank leaned forward. "How much? What did you find?" "Nothing," Jeb said flatly. "Same as always, nothing." "You are lying." Frank's voice was not accusatory, just matter of fact. "But I understand. Out here, you trust no one. Smart policy." He poured himself another drink. "Just remember, Jeb, if you did find something, there are folks who would do bad things to take it from you. Be careful who you talk to. Be careful who you trust. Including you." Frank smiled, but it was a sad smile. "Especially me. I am broke, Jeb. Dead broke. Been broke for 3 years running. A man gets desperate enough, he does things he never thought he would." He raised his cup in a mock toast. "Fair warning. That is all I am saying. Fair warning." The conversation ended when the woman from the bar brought Jeb's supper beans, salt pork, and cornbread that was almost as hard as the plate it sat on. But it was food, and Jeb ate it gratefully while Frank watched with eyes that held something between envy and calculation. After supper, Jeb went to check on Dusty. Old Carlos, a weathered Mexican man with gentle hands, was indeed good with animals. He had cleaned and wrapped the mule's leg and had him settled in a stall with fresh hay and water. "He will be okay," Carlos said in heavily accented English. "Few days' rest, he be strong again." "Thank you," Jeb said. He slipped Carlos an extra dime from his dwindling supply of regular coins, which earned him a gap-toothed smile. Back in his room, Jeb wedged a chair under the doorknob and laid his Bowie knife within easy reach on the bedside crate. He pulled out the wrapped gold coins and counted them again, making sure all 30 were still there. They gleamed in the lamplight, beautiful and dangerous. Frank Holloway knew something was up. Those 3 riders might circle back, and Clayton Morehouse's reach extended farther than Copper Springs. Jeb was beginning to understand that the hardest part of finding treasure was not the finding, it was surviving long enough to claim it. He blew out the lamp and lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of Bitter Well at night, voices from the bar downstairs, footsteps in the hall, the distant howl of a coyote. Every sound made him tense, his hand moving to the knife. He had thought finding the gold would solve his problems, but it seemed like all he had done was trade one set of problems for another, more dangerous kind. The treasure that was supposed to save him might yet be the death of him. Sleep came eventually, but it was thin and troubled, filled with dreams of men with cold eyes, and Sarah's voice asking him a question he could not quite hear. Jeb woke to someone pounding on his door. He sat up fast, knife in hand, heart hammering. Dawn light was just beginning to seep through the room's single grimy window. "Vance," it was Frank Holloway's voice, urgent and rough. "Open up, we need to talk. Now." Jeb pulled on his boots and moved to the door, keeping the knife ready. "What do you want, Frank?" "To save your life, most likely." "Open the damn door." Against his better judgment, Jeb removed the chair and cracked the door open. Frank stood there, looking worse than he had the night before. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hands shook slightly, but there was genuine fear in his expression. "Those 3 riders," Frank said without preamble, "the ones who gave you water yesterday. They were here last night, after you went to bed, asking questions about strangers passing through, about prospectors." Jeb's blood ran cold. "What did you tell them?" "Nothing, but others talked. Said an old prospector came in half dead, checked in with a lame mule and a saddlebag he would not let out of his sight." Frank pushed past Jeb into the room and closed the door behind him. "Jeb, those men work for Clayton Morehouse. I recognize the leader man named Cyrus Wade. He is Morehouse's troubleshooter, and that is a polite word for what he really does." "How do you know this?" Frank sat heavily on the edge of the bed. "Because I have been working for Morehouse too. Not the same way as Wade, nothing violent, just feeding him information. Any rumors about gold strikes, about old claims, about treasure. He pays well, and like I said, I am desperate." He looked up at Jeb with something like shame in his eyes. "I am sorry, Jeb, I truly am, but you need to know what you are up against." Jeb's mind raced. "Why are you telling me this? Why not just turn me in and collect whatever he is paying?" "Because we rode together once, years back. Because you shared your supplies when I had nothing. Because I may be desperate, but I am not that far gone yet." Frank ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Also because I owe you the truth. The whole truth. Morehouse has been searching for that payroll for 10 years, Jeb. Ever since he found his grandfather's diary." "His grandfather?" "Captain Robert Morehouse, 7th Cavalry Regiment. He was one of the officers transporting the payroll when they got ambushed." The diary described the skirmish, the chaos, and how 2 soldiers, including his grandfather, managed to hide the strongbox in a canyon before the Apache overran their position. The grandfather survived, but was too badly wounded to go back. He made it to a fort and spent the rest of his life trying to remember exactly where they had hidden it. Never could pin it down. Died in 73, still searching. Jeb sat down slowly in the room's only chair. Pieces were clicking together in his mind. That is why Morehouse has been buying up claims in the area. Why he has been running off prospectors. Exactly. He has been systematically controlling access to the desert southwest of Copper Springs. Anyone who gets too close to the right area, he runs them off or buys them out. He cannot search it all himself, it is too much territory, but he can make sure nobody else searches it either. Frank leaned forward. Pram, when he finds out you actually located the payroll, he will kill you, Jeb. No question. A man who has spent 10 years and a small fortune searching for something does not let it slip through his fingers because some down-on-his-luck prospector got lucky. I found it fair and square, Jeb said. But even as he spoke the words, he knew how hollow they sounded. The law meant little out here. Possession was 9/10 of everything, and Clayton Morehouse had the men and money to take what he wanted. How much did you bring with you? Frank asked. Jeb hesitated, then figured there was no point in lying now. 30 coins, about $600. The rest is cashed. Where? I am not telling you that. Smart. Frank stood and moved to the window, peering out carefully. Wade and his men were staying in the stable last night. They will be watching to see if you leave. If you try to make a run for it, they will follow you. And if they follow you, they will find the cash. So, what do you suggest? Frank was quiet for a moment, thinking. Morehouse does not know you found it yet. Wade was just checking on strangers as a precaution. But once you get to Copper Springs with those coins, word will spread. You cannot hide that kind of money, which means you have maybe 2 days before Morehouse puts it together. 2 days to do what? To get to the U.S. Marshal in Tucson, to file a proper claim, get legal protection, make the find official. Frank turned back to face him. Or you could sell me the information about where the cash is. I will take it to Morehouse, claim I found it myself, split the finder's fee with you. Safer for both of us. Jeb stood, his jaw tight. I did not spend 20 years searching to hand my claim over to you or anyone else. Then you are a dead man. Maybe, but I will be a dead man who kept his promise. Frank studied him for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. You really did find it for her, did you not? For Sarah. Everything I have done has been for her. She would not want you dead, Jeb. She would want you alive and smart about this. She would want me to finish what I started. Jeb picked up his saddlebag and slung it over his shoulder. Thank you for the warning, Frank. I mean that. But I am not selling. I am not hiding. I am going to Copper Springs, and then to Tucson, and I am going to claim what is mine by right of discovery. Then you need a head start. Frank moved to the door. I will tell Wade you left at first light, heading east toward the Gila. That will buy you a few hours before they realize you went north to Copper Springs instead. After that, you are on your own. Why are you helping me? Frank's smile was bitter, because watching a man chase his dreams for 20 years and then succeed only to have it stolen by someone like Clayton Morehouse, that would be too much even for me. Go on. Get out of here. Take the back way through the stable. Carlos will help you. He has no love for Morehouse's men. Jeb clasped Frank's hand briefly. I will remember this. Just stay alive long enough for it to matter. Jeb slipped out through the back of the building as the sun rose. Carlos had Dusty already saddled, and the old Mexican pressed a full canteen into Jeb's hands. Vaya con Dios, he whispered. Go with God. Jeb rode out, heading north, pushing Dusty as fast as the mule's injured leg would allow. The morning was cool still, the heat not yet building to its daily fury. Behind him, Bitterwell disappeared into the distance. Somewhere back there, Cyrus Wade and his men would soon discover they had been deceived. They would come looking, but Jeb had a head start now, and he had something worth fighting for. The treasure was real, the danger was real, and for the first time in 20 years, Jebediah Vance felt truly alive. The game had changed. No longer was he just a failed prospector trying to prove himself. Now he was a man in a race against time, against powerful enemies, against all the bad luck that had dogged him his entire life. The question was whether his luck had finally changed, or whether finding the treasure would turn out to be the worst thing that had ever happened to him. Copper Springs was 2 days away if he pushed hard, 2 days to stay ahead of Wade, 2 days to figure out how to protect his claim against a man who owned half a town and had no scruples about taking what he wanted. Jeb touched the saddlebag containing the 30 gold coins and thought of Sarah. "I am almost there," he said to the empty desert. "I am almost home." But first, he had to survive the journey, and that, he was beginning to realize, might be the hardest part of all. The race to Copper Springs took Jeb 2 long days that felt like a lifetime. He pushed Dusty harder than he should have, alternating between walking and riding, trying to make time while not crippling the mule completely. Every hour, he expected to see riders on the horizon behind him. Every rock formation might hide an ambush. The 30 gold coins in his saddlebag felt like they weighed 100 pounds, pulling at him with the weight of danger and possibility. He traveled through the heat of the day, something he would never have done under normal circumstances, but these were not normal circumstances. He was being hunted by men who would kill him for what he carried, and speed mattered more than comfort or caution. The sun hammered down mercilessly, and he rationed his water with the kind of iron discipline that can only come from genuine fear. On the afternoon of the second day, he finally saw the copper-colored hills that gave the town its name. Relief flooded through him so powerfully that his hands shook on the reins. He was close now, close to safety, close to people who knew him, close to being able to tell his story and claim what was rightfully his. But as he approached the outskirts of town, he saw riders coming from the south. His heart sank. 3 men, moving fast, cutting across the desert at an angle that would intercept him before he reached Main Street. Wade and his men. They had figured out Frank's deception faster than expected. Jeb urged Dusty to a trot, despite the mule's exhausted condition. The buildings of Copper Springs were close now, close enough that he could see people moving about their business on the street. If he could just reach the town proper, reach the sheriff's office, he might be safe. Wade would not dare try anything violent in front of witnesses. Or would he? Men who worked for Clayton Morehouse might figure they were above the law, at least in a town where their employer owned half the property and most of the politicians. Jeb reached the first buildings on the edge of town, just as Wade and his men caught up to him. They surrounded him, their horses blocking his path forward. "End of the line, old man," Wade said. His hand rested casually on his gun belt, and his cold grey eyes held no mercy. "You led us on quite a chase. That was not friendly." "I am not feeling particularly friendly," Jeb said. His own hand moved toward his Bowie knife. His old army revolver had been sold years ago to pay debts. "You are in my way." "Your way." Wade smiled without warmth. "I think you are confused about how this works. See, you found something that belongs to Mr. Morehouse, his grandfather's payroll. That makes it his property, rightfully speaking. I found it in unclaimed territory. That makes it mine. That is a matter of opinion. Mr. Morehouse sees it different." They were attracting attention now. People on Main Street had stopped to watch the confrontation. Jeb saw Martha Hendricks standing outside her store, her hand pressed to her mouth. Sheriff Tom Dalton was emerging from his office, moving toward them with deliberate purpose. "There a problem here, gentlemen?" Tom's voice was calm but carried the weight of authority. He was a big man, 6 feet tall and solid, with a star pinned to his vest and a reputation for fairness that even Morehouse's money could not entirely corrupt. "No problem, Sheriff," Wade said easily. "Just talking to an old friend." Did not look much like friendly conversation from where I was standing. Tom moved to stand beside Jeb, and the simple act of solidarity made Jeb's throat tighten. "Jeb, you all right?" I am fine, Tom. These men were just leaving. Wade's eyes narrowed. This is not over. Sure, sounds like it is, Tom said. You three best move along now. I will not have intimidation on the streets of my town. For a moment, Jeb thought Wade might push it. The man's hand stayed on his gun, and something dangerous flickered in his expression. But there were too many witnesses now, too many people watching. Wade nodded slowly. We will be around, Sheriff. Mr. Morehouse has business interests in Copper Springs. We will be around. The three riders moved off down the street, but they did not leave town. They tied their horses outside the saloon and went inside, making it clear they were staying close. Tom watched them go, then turned to Jeb. You want to tell me what that was about? Long story. Got time for long stories. Come on to the office. But before they could move, Martha Hendricks was there, and behind her, young Billy Santos. Martha's eyes were wide with concern. Jeb, we thought you were dead. You have been gone more than a week. Takes more than the desert to kill me, Jeb said, trying for a smile. The relief of seeing friendly faces, of being back among people who cared whether he lived or died, was almost overwhelming. Billy was staring at Dusty's injured leg. What happened to him? Took a bad step. He will be all right with rest. Jeb dismounted stiffly, every muscle protesting. Billy, can you take him to the stable? Tell old Pete I will pay him soon. Tell him to take good care of Dusty. He earned it. The boy nodded and took the mule's reins, leading the exhausted animal away. Jeb kept his saddlebag over his shoulder. In Tom's office, with the door closed and Martha sitting quietly in the corner, she had insisted on coming, and Jeb had not had the heart to refuse her. Jeb told his story. He started with the old map and the legend of the lost payroll. He described his journey into the desert, getting lost, running out of water, finding the deformed cactus and what was hidden inside it. When he pulled out the wrapped gold coins and laid them on Tom's desk, the sheriff's eyes widened. Martha gasped softly. Sweet Jesus, Tom said, picking up one of the coins and examining it. The 7th Regiment payroll. I thought that was just a story. So did I, but it is real. Jeb leaned forward. Tom, I found this fair and square. It was on unclaimed land. By law, it is mine. By law, yes. Tom set the coin down carefully. But you know as well as I do that law and justice are not always the same thing, especially when men like Clayton Morehouse get involved. Morehouse, Martha said quietly. Those men who stopped Jeb work for him. Do they not? Tom nodded grimly. Cyrus Wade. He does Morehouse's dirty work, and if Morehouse knows about this, he knows, Jeb said, or he will soon. That is why I need to get to Tucson as fast as possible, file an official claim with the U.S. Marshal, make this legal and binding before Morehouse can stop me. Tucson is 2 days away, 3 if you do not kill another mule getting there. You think Wade is going to let you just ride out of town? Not without a fight. Tom was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Finally, he said, the stage to Tucson leaves tomorrow morning at 7. I can deputize a couple of reliable men to ride shotgun with you. Morehouse is rich, but even he thinks twice about interfering with official U.S. mail and passengers. Would that work? Might not. But it is better than riding out alone where Wade can pick you off in the desert and nobody would be the wiser. Tom stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street. Question is, can you survive the night? If Morehouse decides he wants those coins before you can get on that stage, he has the men and the means to take them. I will help, Martha said suddenly. Both men turned to look at her. She stood, her face set with determination. Jeb can stay at my house tonight. I have a spare room, and everyone knows me in this town. Even Morehouse would not dare send his men to break into a respectable widow's home. It would cause a scandal he could not afford. Martha, I cannot ask you to. You are not asking. I am offering. She looked at Jeb with gentle firmness. You helped me when my husband died, sat with me through the worst of it, helped me figure out how to run the store on my own. Let me return the kindness." Jeb felt his eyes sting. "I am putting you in danger. Life is danger. You taught me that. Now stop being stubborn and accept help when it is offered." Tom nodded slowly. "That might work. You stay with Martha tonight. Keep those coins close. I will arrange for the stage escort and make sure the driver knows to wait for you tomorrow morning. Soon as you are in Tucson, you file that claim and get it registered proper. After that, Morehouse can complain all he wants, but the law will be on your side." "And what about the rest of the gold?" Martha asked. "You said you only brought 30 coins. Where is the rest?" "Cached in the desert, hidden where only I can find it." "Then that is what Morehouse really wants," Tom said. "The location of the cache. The coins you have got are nothing compared to what you left behind. He will want to know where it is. He can want all he likes. I am not telling him. Even if he threatens to kill you? Especially then. The moment I tell him where the cache is, I am dead anyway. At least this way, I have leverage." Tom sighed. "You always were too stubborn for your own good, Jeb. All right, we do it your way. But you stay close to Martha until that stage leaves. Do not go anywhere alone. Do not trust anyone you do not know. And keep that knife of yours sharp. You might need it before this is over." As if summoning him with their words, the office door opened, and Clayton Morehouse himself walked in. He was impeccably dressed as always, and he wore a smile that made Jeb's skin crawl. "Sheriff Dalton," Morehouse said pleasantly, "Mrs. Hendricks, and Jeb Vance. I heard you made it back from the desert. I am so glad. I would hate for anything unfortunate to happen to you." The threat in his words was barely concealed. Tom stepped forward, putting himself between Morehouse and Jeb. "State your business, Clayton, then move along. I have got work to do." "Oh, my business is with Mr. Vance, actually. You see, I have reason to believe he found something in the desert that rightfully belongs to my family. I would like to discuss a fair arrangement for returning it." "Nothing to discuss," Jeb said, standing. "What I found is mine by law." "Law?" Morehouse's smile widened. "How quaint. Out here, Mr. Vance, I am the law. I own this town. I own these people. And soon I will own that treasure you are so desperately trying to keep." He tipped his hat. "Sleep well tonight, if you can." He walked out, leaving a cold silence in his wake. Martha's house was modest but well kept, a 2-room adobe structure behind her general store. She settled Jeb into the spare room with clean sheets and a pitcher of fresh water, then made him wash the desert grime from his face and hands before she would let him sit at her table. The meal she prepared was simple beans, cornbread, and coffee, strong enough to strip paint, but it was the best thing Jeb had eaten in weeks. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, while Martha watched him with the kind of concerned attention a mother gives a wayward son. "You have lost weight," she said finally. "Too much weight. Desert will do that to a man." "It is not just the desert. You have been running yourself into the ground for years, Jeb, chasing something that maybe was not meant to be caught. But I did catch it. That is the wonder of it. After all this time, I actually found what I was looking for. And now men want to kill you for it." Martha's voice was gentle but firm. "Was it worth it?" Jeb thought about Sarah, about the promise he had made, about 20 years of failure and disappointment that had led to this one improbable success. "I do not know yet. Ask me when I am still alive to answer." That is not funny. Was not trying to be funny. Martha stood and began clearing the dishes. "You can still give it up, you know. Tell Morehouse where the cache is. Take whatever finder's fee he offers. It would be enough to start over somewhere else, somewhere he cannot reach." "That is not who I am." "I know. That is what worries me." After supper, Jeb sat in the spare room with his saddlebag beside him and his knife on the small table. Through the window he could see lights in the town, hear the distant sounds of the saloon. Somewhere out there, Cyrus Wade and his men were waiting. Somewhere out there, Clayton Morehouse was plotting how to take what Jeb had found. He thought about what Martha had said. Was it worth it? The treasure was real, but so was the danger. He had escaped death in the desert only to face it again here in civilization. And for what? Money? Pride? The memory of a promise made to a woman who had been dead for 4 years? A soft knock on the door made him tense. "It is just me," Martha said. She came in, carrying a rifle. "It belonged to my late husband. I want you to have it tonight, just in case." Jeb took the weapon and checked it over. Well maintained, fully loaded. "Thank you. You are not the only one who keeps promises." "Jeb, I promised myself I would never stand by and let good people suffer if I could help. You are a good person, stubborn and foolish sometimes, but good." She touched his shoulder briefly. "Get some sleep if you can. Morning will be here before you know it." But sleep did not come easy. Jeb lay in the darkness, listening to the night sounds of Copper Springs. Every creak of the house made him reach for his knife. Every passing footstep on the street outside made his heart race. Around midnight, he heard it, the soft scrape of someone trying the back door. He rose silently, knife in one hand, rifle in the other, and moved through the dark house like a ghost. Martha was already awake in her room. He could see light under her door. The back door rattled again, more insistently this time. Jeb positioned himself to the side of it and spoke clearly. "The door is locked. The windows are barred. I am armed, and I will shoot. Tell Morehouse this is not the way." Silence. Then a voice from outside, not Wade's, someone younger. "Just following orders, old man. Mr. Morehouse wants to talk. In the morning, on the stage. Tell him he can follow me to Tucson if he wants to talk so bad. He is not a patient man. That is his problem, not mine." More silence. Then the sound of footsteps retreating. Jeb stayed at the door for another hour, watching and listening, but no one returned. The message had been sent and received. Morehouse knew where he was, knew he had the gold, and was testing his defenses, finding them adequate, at least for tonight. When Jeb finally returned to his room, he found Billy Santos sitting on his bed. The boy had somehow gotten in through the window, silent as smoke. "I wanted to make sure you were all right," Billy said simply. "How did you get past the bars? I am small, and I know ways." Jeb should have been angry, but he found he could not muster it. The boy's loyalty touched something deep in his chest. "You should not be here. It is dangerous. That is why I am here. You helped me when I needed it. My turn." Billy pulled something from his pocket, a small revolver, old but serviceable. "My father's. I know how to use it. I can watch your back tomorrow, on the stage." "Billy, please, let me help. Let me be useful." Jeb looked at the boy's earnest face and saw himself 30 years ago, desperate to matter, to make a difference, to prove he was worth something. He saw Sarah in the boy's eyes too, the belief that people should help each other, that kindness was not weakness, but strength. "All right," he said quietly, "but you stay close to me, and if shooting starts, you duck. I can do that." They sat together in the darkness, an old man and a young boy, both protecting something precious. Outside, the night wore on toward dawn. Dawn broke clear and cold over Copper Springs. Jeb, Martha, and Billy walked together down Main Street toward the stage depot, passing storekeepers opening their shops and early risers beginning their day. Sheriff Tom Dalton and 2 deputized townsmen, both reliable men Jeb had known for years, flanked them with rifles held ready but not aimed. The message was clear. This departure was under official protection. The stage sat waiting, its team of 6 horses already harnessed and stamping impatiently. The driver, a grizzled veteran named Cal Henderson, sat on the box checking his shotgun. He nodded to Jeb as they approached. "Heard you are riding with special cargo today. Just trying to get to Tucson in one piece." "We will get you there." Cal's eyes moved past them to the far end of the street, though it looks like some folks want to discuss the matter first. Clayton Morehouse stood in the middle of Main Street with Cyrus Wade and his 2 men flanking him. They were positioned to block the stage's path, and Morehouse's expression was one of cold determination. The confrontation Jeb had been dreading was finally here. Tom Dalton stepped forward. Clayton, move aside. The stage needs to depart on schedule. Not until Mr. Vance and I have reached an understanding. Morehouse's voice carried in the morning air, and people were beginning to gather, sensing drama. He has something that belongs to my family. I am prepared to offer a fair price for its return. It does not belong to your family, Jeb said, finding his voice. It belongs to me. I found it. I claimed it. The law is on my side. The law. Morehouse's smile was cold. The law is what I say it is in this town. You are a thief, Vance, a claim jumper. You knew I was searching for that payroll, and you deliberately went looking for it yourself. Public land, public knowledge, anyone had a right to search for it. This is getting us nowhere. Tom's hand moved to his gun. Clayton, last warning, move aside, or I will have you arrested for interfering with U.S. mail service. You would not dare. Try me. The tension stretched like a wire about to snap. Wade's hand was on his gun. Tom's deputies had their rifles half raised. One wrong move, one nervous trigger pull, and Main Street would turn into a bloodbath. Then Martha Hendricks did something extraordinary. She walked past the armed men directly to Clayton Morehouse and looked him in the eye. Clayton Morehouse, your mother was a good woman. I knew her well. She would be ashamed to see what you have become. Morehouse's face flushed. This is none of your concern, Martha. It is every citizen's concern when you use fear and violence to get what you want. That treasure does not belong to you just because your grandfather failed to retrieve it. Jeb found it fairly. Let him go. One widow's opinion does not change facts. Then let us talk about facts. Sheriff Tom's voice was hard as iron. Fact, Jeb found that payroll on unclaimed public land. Fact, by territorial law, that makes it his by right of discovery. Fact, you are currently obstructing a U.S. mail stage, which is a federal offense. Fact, I have got 3 rifles pointed at your back right now, and if you push this any further, you are going to jail. Rich or not, I will do it. Morehouse looked at Wade, at the deputies, at the crowd of townspeople watching. Jeb could see the calculation in his eyes. He was powerful, yes, but not powerful enough to openly defy federal law in front of dozens of witnesses. Not without consequences even he could not buy his way out of. This is not over, Morehouse said finally. Not by a long measure. It is over for today. Tom gestured to his deputies. Escort Mr. Vance to the stage. Jeb climbed aboard, his saddlebag clutched tight. Billy followed him, refusing to be left behind. Martha stood on the sidewalk, and when Jeb looked down at her, she smiled a smile of pride and hope, and something that might have been affection. Come back safe, she said. And Jeb, no more desert expeditions for a while. Promise me that much. I promise. The stage lurched forward. Cal cracked his whip over the horses' heads, and they pulled away from the depot at a trot that quickly became a canter. Jeb looked back through the window and saw Morehouse still standing in the street, his face twisted with rage and frustration. Tom and his deputies had not lowered their rifles. Then the stage rounded a bend, and Copper Springs disappeared behind them. Jeb leaned back against the seat and let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Billy sat beside him, the boy's small revolver hidden under his coat, his eyes bright with excitement. "We did it," Billy said. "Not yet. Tucson is still 2 days away. Morehouse is not the type to give up easy. Let him try. We have got each other, and Mr. Henderson knows how to handle a shotgun." Jeb smiled, despite himself. The boy was right. They had each other. And sometimes that was enough to make the difference between failure and success, between death and life, between a broken promise and one finally kept. The stage rolled on toward Tucson, carrying a fortune in gold and an old man's hope for redemption. The filing of the claim took less than an hour at the U.S. Marshal's office in Tucson. Jeb presented his 30 gold coins, told his story to a skeptical deputy marshal who became less skeptical as the tale unfolded, and signed documents that made his discovery official and legal. By noon, He held papers that declared him the rightful owner of the 7th Cavalry Regiment payroll, recovered from public land in accordance with territorial law. Clayton Morehouse could complain all he wanted. The law was settled. The journey back to the desert to retrieve the cash took another week. This time, Jeb went properly equipped with a wagon, hired guards, and Sheriff Tom Dalton riding alongside. Billy came too, refusing to be left behind, and Jeb found he was glad for the company. The boy had earned his place in this story. They found the cactus exactly where Jeb had left it, the deformed bulge still visible from a distance. Jeb climbed up one more time, enduring the spines one more time, and pulled out the wrapped strongbox. When he opened it on the ground and the sunlight caught those gold coins, Billy's eyes went wide as saucers. "That is a lot of money," the boy whispered. "It is indeed," Jeb said. "More than enough to change some lives." They loaded the strongbox into the wagon and began the journey back to Copper Springs. This time, there was no desperate race against death. This time, Jeb traveled as a man who had finally accomplished what he set out to do, who had kept a promise made long ago to someone he loved. Word of his success had spread through the territory by the time they returned. Men he had never met wanted to shake his hand. Old prospectors who had once looked at him with pity now regarded him with something close to awe. Even Clayton Morehouse kept his distance, his lawyers already preparing challenges that would go nowhere because the law was clear and Jeb's claim was valid. The first thing Jeb did was pay his debts. Every penny he owed to Tom, to Martha, to the various merchants who had extended him credit over the years, all paid in full with interest. The relief on their faces was worth more than the gold itself. The second thing he did was buy a proper headstone for Sarah's grave. White marble with her name carved deep, and beneath it the words, "Promise kept." He stood there in the cemetery for a long time, one hand resting on the cool stone, and told her everything that had happened. He liked to think she could hear him, that wherever she was smiling. The third thing he did was establish a fund for Billy Santos. Enough money to ensure the boy could get an education, could apprentice with a good trade, could have opportunities that poverty would have denied him. Billy cried when Jeb told him, and Jeb had to look away because his own eyes were stinging. "Why are you doing this?" Billy asked. "Because someone should. Because you deserve a chance. Because that is what people who care about each other do." Martha received a substantial sum as well, though she protested that she did not need charity. "It is not charity," Jeb told her. "It is gratitude. You kept me alive when I had nothing. Let me help you now that I have something." She used the money to expand her store and hire help, and when Jeb visited her there a month later, she looked 10 years younger. The weight of constant financial worry finally lifted from her shoulders. As for Jeb himself, he bought a small ranch on good land with water rights just outside Copper Springs. Nothing fancy, but solid and productive. He bought cattle, hired a few hands, and settled into the kind of life he had always imagined but never quite believed he would achieve. Dusty lived out his days in a comfortable stable, his injured leg eventually healing, and Jeb made sure the mule never wanted for anything. He never married again. Sarah had been the love of his life, and he felt no need to replace what could not be replaced. But he was not lonely. Billy visited often, treating the ranch as a second home. Martha came by for Sunday dinners. Tom Dalton stopped in to play chess and talk about old times. Frank Holloway appeared one day, hat in hand, asking if Jeb might have work for a man trying to start fresh. Jeb hired him without hesitation, and Frank proved to be a reliable hand who never spoke about his time working for Morehouse or the choices he had made and regretted. On the first anniversary of finding the treasure, Jeb rode out into the desert alone. He brought flowers, wildflowers, that grew along the canyon walls and placed them at the base of the Saguaro cactus that had saved his life. The cactus was healing, the scar from where he had cut it slowly closing as the plant grew. In a few more years, there would be no sign that anything unusual had ever happened here. But Jeb would remember. He would remember the desperation and the fear, the moment when his blade struck metal, the sweet taste of water from the cactus's heart. He would remember that sometimes the things we search for all our lives are found in the most unexpected places, and that the journey matters as much as the destination. Standing there in the desert with the sun warm on his face and the wind whispering through the canyon, Jebediah Vance felt something he had not felt in 20 years. Peace. Not the peace of a man who has given up, but the peace of a man who has finally succeeded, who has kept his promise, who has earned his rest. He mounted his horse, a good bay gelding, strong and reliable, and rode back toward Copper Springs. Back toward the ranch that was now his home, toward the life he had built with the fortune that the desert had grudgingly surrendered. Back toward friends who valued him for who he was, not what he had found. The treasure had saved him from poverty, but it was the journey and the people he had met along the way that had saved him from despair. And in the end, that was the real discovery, not gold hidden in a cactus, but the knowledge that even after 20 years of failure, redemption was still possible. Second chances were real. And promises, if a man was stubborn enough and lucky enough, could still be kept. The desert stretched out behind him, keeping its remaining secrets close, and Jebediah Vance rode home.